Hello, welcome. Right, it's the daily loot video. We'll get into it. Actually, just to be for full transparency here, we already did this process, but the I forgot to. We had the microphone muted, so the audio didn't record. So we're redoing it again. So just for full transparency here. Probably be able to go through it more snappy now though, like less umming and ahhing and just boom, boom, boom. So if you are, watching these data loop videos and you do end up preferring it in this format versus the more like raw initial reaction to things, but more of a like, not the initial reaction because I've already seen it. So this is like I've seen it, I've thought about it, and now I'm effectively, it's like a secondary reaction. If you prefer it in this format though, and you're regularly watching these videos, just let us know so that we can maybe do them like this all the time or some of the time or whatever. Because I think these data loop ones will be generally probably not the most those who are watching them probably watch all of them or none of them sort of thing. So it's definitely worth trying to get this for those who are watching them. Just getting it in a format that is good. And that aside, if you have any other suggestions for a format change for these, let us know. With all that being said, let's go. So the first thing we normally do is check the transfer bids. Yet again, we got a bid for this keeper. It's like, I think this is the third bid, maybe. Now, you get 3 bids for the player that you're not interested in selling or whatever, but obviously, it's looking. There's reasons for that, like including of which, if we were looking to sell him, he'd already be sold on one of the previous, probably the first bid, so we never would have got the second or third, if you know what I mean. So it's like we're manufacturing a trend, like we're looking for a pattern and manufacturing a trend out of something that, like, it's totally logical, right? Like, you're more likely to get bids for the players you're not looking to sell, because those that you are looking to sell, you've already sold them if you get the bids. So anyway, it's the case that it's the same. We've talked about this in the past couple of times we've got the bid for him. Basically, like, we're totally happy for this guy as a backup. He's young enough, and he's on the minimum wages, which is great and he's good enough. And at the end of the day, if we end up having to start this guy, maybe not in a higher division, but certainly for like next season or an interim for next season, like we sell our current starting keeper because we've sort of too high wages overpaid or whatever, and maybe it takes some time to find another keeper. And because if we get the bid for the other keeper, we're just going to sell him. So it's too big a different. The amount of money extra is too meaningful for us to pass that up. And then this guy will start. So, and then we're also just happy for this guy to be the long-term backup. So yeah, unfortunately, but this guy's just hanging around. It's fortunate that we've got a player like this that we're happy to start. We're happy to have as the backup. We're happy to keep around for a few seasons, and he's on these low wages and. He might even get quite a bit better, actually, because of, there's quite a decent ceiling over this here, a bit of room for growth. So, yeah. Moving on. The scouter players, right, we'll sort by position. So, now, there is a sort of issue that, like, generally speaking, like, as we pick up players, it's getting harder and harder to improve our team. And when we keep saying that players are not good enough or this or that, loads of these players are totally good enough to be able to do very, very well in the division that we're currently in and the division we'll be in next season. But we're not recruiting players for that anymore at all. We are quite confident we're just going to get promoted next season with what we got. We don't need anything to... Well, we might be overconfident here, but... this is the thing. This is part of doing these videos. You need to try to understand where you're actually at in order to plan and whatever. So the place that we believe where we're at is that we are fine to get promoted next season, and we can have a bit of flexibility there. There are a couple of older players in the team we could sell, and if we don't have them, we'll still be fine. So right now, we're not recruiting players to help us get promoted next season. What we're recruiting is players that basically can help us after next season when a couple divisions higher. So that's kind of the lens of what we're doing this through. So we need to be trying to find players that are younger, like to some degree, the younger the better, that we can use now, so that we get some value out of them now, and that have sufficient scope to sort of become players in the future that will still be good for us when we're multiple divisions higher. So it's quite, through that lens, combined with the fact that we also want low wages now, and we also don't want to pay ideally a big asking price, and like through all of these combination of factors, it's very, very difficult for us to recruit these, as it should be, basically. Like, we have so many requirements here, plus we're looking for really specific attributes per position and all sorts of stuff. So we have so many requirements at this point that we, in a way, like, if we could pick up a player that we're happy with every couple of days, that's fine. But again, the more we pick up, the less we need to pick up, the harder it becomes. That's the reality. So now that will change a little bit when we have more money at some point in the future, and we can also be trying to buy players that are just for the youth team. But right now, we don't have that. We don't have that luxury. Basically, like, they have to be able to contribute to the senior team to justify purchasing them. So yeah. Anyway, let's go. So too old. It's almost like, it doesn't even matter what they are. This age, these wages, nothing matters. Just doesn't make. It could be the best grip in the game, and it doesn't matter for us because we don't need them. And by the time we do need them, they will be retired or too old or worse or whatever. So it's almost like, it doesn't matter. None of the, it doesn't matter. This guy, just not high enough shot stopping, not good enough. Don't use left back, too old. Don't use left back, 15 tackling, 28 tackling. Just not good enough at this age with 45 tackling. 68 tackling maybe okay for 19 years old, but just the other stuff is just too low. The speed's super slow. It's very hard to compensate for that without him being world class at something. He's not on cue for that. Aerial ability also behind where it needs to be. Marking, probably, there's so many things that are just, the tackling is okay if other things were great to make up for it, but the other things are the opposite. They're dragging him back, even to the point where the tackling needs to be way higher than 68 to consider that guy. This guy, he's a bit different here. He is fast, so now you're saying the other stuff doesn't need to be as high, but I think we mulled over this guy a lot, for transparency here, when we did the initial run through, the initial reactions. But after a lot of mulling through, it basically just, it is the case that 57 tackling at 20 years old, it's just not good enough. You can get a graduate that starts with 57 or 60 or whatever. So it's just not high enough. And then we checked his training, I think it was +1. Yeah, it's +1 in tackling. So it's like, that it's 58. And at that point, the guy is 21 years old next season and has 58 tackling. He's just way behind where he needs to be. And whilst this other stuff looks okay or whatever, it's just, he's too far behind, basically, where he needs to be. So, having said that, he would be awesome for the youth team next season, but we're not in a position to consume these kind of resources, like we're saying, for a player that's just going to be awesome for the youth team, basically for one season, and then could kind of do a job for the senior team in a lower division as well. This is the thing. He could do a job. He could be the 5th choice, the 4th choice, maybe even start, to be honest, in a lower division, but he's not building towards anything. We want these players that have it. Of course, they're not going to be guaranteed to become the players that can compete in Division 1, but they need to have a chance. And I think this guy just, unfortunately, with the tackling is where it is at, going up 1 this month, it's just not going to get to the type of level that it needs to be. Combined with the fact that, the aerial ability isn't where it needs to be, the marking is a little bit behind, the positioning is behind. He's not a great distributor. He's just okay one. So the passing isn't going to. He's just not going to make up for it on the whole. There was another random plus for him though that we were discussing, which is probably worth noting from a squad building perspective, which is that we have bought a couple of 21-year-olds, but we haven't bought players for the senior team that are younger than 21. When we buy this guy, his contract will be until November. So that is good from the perspective that at the moment our contracts are all the players we bought this month that are basically over 21, they're all ending in 3 months' time. Well, this month and 2 more months. So we're going to have a lot of contracts expiring around the same time. So having a player whose contract is not, it's a couple months in the future after everybody else and 1 month in the future after the two 21-year-olds, that is an intrinsic benefit in and of itself to sort of stagger the contract expiry, to make the contract management a bit easier. Basically having the longer contracts is just, that's a factor here. So being able to recruit players that are 20, that are 19, that are 18, it isn't just that the fact that their contracts are longer is a very significant factor that we haven't talked about that yet. So it's just worth bearing in mind. So that's a reason to get this guy. And to be honest, it's like, if he was, we say this a lot, but if he was different somehow, so if he was, let's say 19, and maybe because the contract is one more, he has a bit more time to grow. He probably still is behind where he needs to be, but not as far behind. Maybe, but I don't know. Maybe then, but again, he's not. So it's yeah. It's just anyway. So this we really deliberated over this guy. Anyway, so these were the factors. The decision in the end, though, is just not. He's not where he needs to be in order to be. It's unlikely that he is going to be a really good central defender in Division 1 in Masters League. He's not going to become that player. So, and if we're recruiting these younger players, we're doing it through the lens. At the moment, we believe that we will get promoted next season. We're looking to get promoted the season after. I think we should have clear promotions loosely with where our squad is at. It should definitely just be probably quite clear sailing to Division 1. I would think if it's not just straight promotions, we probably only miss one promotion to get to Division 1, if I had to guess. And then exactly how long it will take to get from Division 1 to the Masters League, that's going to depend a lot on a lot of factors, so it's hard to project that at this point. That's going to be far from certain that we will get that one on the first go. But, it's dependent on fact, including, for example, us picking up these younger players now, enough of them, and that some of them actually turning into really good players by then to help us out at that point. So anyway, we're not going to get him, but it was a very... I don't know if close is in the end, but it's just a lot to think about to sort of... In the end, though, it's just very hard to compensate for this 57 tackling that'll become 58 when he's a centre-half, basically. Particularly in our tactic, it's different. This guy potentially could be good enough in a different tactic, especially with a flat back four. Because in a flat back four, depending on factors, but it is typically the case that the fullbacks do take a brunt of the tackling load. And that, for example, you could have two centre halves, one that's a stopper, one's a cover. It's a typically great combination. And this guy potentially could be a good cover because the stopper that become more important than with the tackling. And as a cover, what you really, really want more than anything is for him to be fast and picking up those loose balls at the back, marking players in the box, and also when he gets the ball, to be able to distribute it well. Now, potentially, the passing and the vision... potentially he could become that player. But for us, because we're not playing fullbacks, we don't absorb a lot of the tackling load onto them, and our centre halves all have to do sort of their fair share of tackling. We only got 3 defenders; they all have to be able to tackle. I think that's the crux of it here. Whereas if you've got 4, you can potentially have one that doesn't, who's really good at other things that fits to the tactic. Probably not a fullback, but one of the 2 central defenders. So potentially, for a different tactic with fullbacks, this guy could... Because at the end of the day, 57 tackling will not cut it, even for whatever role as a defender in a high division. But the thing is, this could become 65, it could become 68, it maybe even could become 70. And at those type of levels, with better passing and more around that, he could be good enough for a different tactic, just not for what we're playing. That's all. Right. Too slow and not good in the air and whatever. Tackling is okay at that level, so if this other stuff wasn't so far behind, and maybe, but it is, so don't use right back. Super fast though. I mean, interestingly for us, he's pretty good for the wide midfielder that gets up and back. I think with this speed, within this endurance and natural fitness, he can get up and back. He has the passing at a level that's sufficiently okay for us, and he's very well rounded. He's kind of the perfect player for us for that left or right midfield position, but he's 30. But anyway, I'm just pointing that out. So in the future, adding the positions would be a bit of a... This is a player that we might potentially have picked up if we were in Division 1 now and added ML or MR to him, because he is pretty well rounded, pretty good. Just don't underestimate, I think, players like this. This guy, I think, would perform in our tactic. He doesn't look particularly special, but I think it's just a combination of these really high physicals, and just this stuff is super well rounded. Plus, the thing that we care about most for that particular position is the passing, which out of all of the technicals and mentals, that is the highest one. I think this guy could do a job, basically, and at this price, and when you're in a high division, you got a huge amount of financial capacity to be able to commit to a guy like this, even if it is just for one season. So an example why you might pick him up is because you've got a youth player that's playing that position that isn't quite ready yet. You know what I mean? Like, he's ready to be the backup, but he's not quite ready to be the starter. You just need this guy to come in and be the starter for one season and to bring the other guy through, or maybe 1.5 or whatever. But that's basically like you're getting this guy as a stopgap, because you have a longer term plan. So he's like the perfect type of like resource commitment for that, because it's a low purchase price. Like, the wages are huge for us, but they're not high. It's not particularly high wages in a much higher division if it's going to help your team do way better or whatever. So there are reasons why you could legitimately pick up a player, like why we could pick up a player like this when we're in something like Division 1. Like, I don't think he's quite a Masters League player though. This guy, we don't use fullbacks, don't use wingbacks, don't use this guy. Yeah, don't use wingbacks, don't use this. We do use, but not enough tackling. Don't use right wingback, don't use wingback. Don't use wingback. Don't use wingback. Sort of okay on the whole, but the passing is too low. If the passing was like 70, then there would be much more of a conversation to have about this guy, because he probably is. Then you're in the realms of like, yeah, probably you don't get him anyway because he's 27. But if he had like 70 passing plus he was like 23, then serious conversation to be had about this guy, because he's got a lot of stuff for the role for us in particular. But yeah, that's two massive differences. Like, so it's not worth getting too hooked up on that. Too old, but you know, there's maybe stuff across this guy, but just too old, so it's not really worth discussing. Too low tackling, too low passing, too old, too low tackling. Right, too low tackling. So one thing with the midfielders we've realised is that I don't think going forwards, especially in the high division, we're going to be able to commit to having a central midfielder that has the attacking midfielder role. Probably, like, we need our central midfielders to be one to be able to attack and defend. And it might be the case in any specific match they can have an attacking midfielder role, but we have to be dynamic about it. We're going to have to be able to change that mid-match all the time. We're very defensively exposed because we're only playing 3 defenders. It's a natural thing, and depending on the opposition and how many players they got forwards, we're going to have to sometimes have midfielders up and back, contributing to both attack and defense. Sometimes one will just have to hang back. At the end of the day, a lot of the time, the midfielders are going to have to get involved defending all of the central midfielders, whether it's 2 or 3 in matches, and we just won't be able to support a central midfielder with super low tackling scores, even if we primarily want them to do attacking stuff. These really low tackling scores, this one is okay, but he too old. But yeah, has a low passing, whatever. But the tackling is okay, but we can't sustain these super low tackling scores, so we're just ignoring them. This guy, kind of interesting. Obviously, great aerial ability, which is something we keep factoring in. But it's like it's a additional factor to consider if the player is on the, like, I don't know, the fence, so to speak. Maybe not. And he's not on the fence just because his sort of important attributes are just behind where they need to be. I mean, it's not that unreasonable. For example, if you look at the technicals in isolation, like, we could just totally get a graduate that has this. There's nothing even above the starting attribute values there. And in regards to the mentals, there are a few, but only just. So you're saying, like, basically you can have a player that starts like this, and the only things are the speed, which isn't, it's okay or whatever, but if it's a totally reasonable amount we could expect most of our graduates to get to that start with 50 plus speed to get to by the time they're 22. And so you're left with the only real special things being the aerial ability and agility, and that's just not enough. So there's not enough there to make sense. This guy, just not quite enough there to make sense. There's only a few bits. He's 19. You can look at his boosts or whatever, but there's just not enough here that he's in regards to becoming, I guess you could say this through the lens what we're at now. We're looking at these younger players through the lens that can they become Masters League players? Can they become Division 1 players? At least, and he's not going to become good enough to be a Division 1 player. That's what it comes down to. But they could be good enough. Where was this guy? Could potentially be totally fine for Division 4 or whatever. But yeah, obviously we don't want a road to Masters series, not a road to spending 10 seasons in Division 3 or 4 or whatever. So we need to be looking at it through the lens of actually getting to the Masters League. but there's not. That's just for this series. There isn't necessarily any reason why there is like a massive rush to have to do it. It's just, can take the time, build the squad up, and to be honest, if we do another series, that could kind of be more fun. I'd rather not have to do this rush, but obviously we're doing this Road to Masters series, so to some degree, there is an expectation that we will get to the Masters League, obviously from the title. So, but to be honest, from a general gameplay perspective, it's my view that the game would just generally be more fun to not sort of be forcing to rush that way, and to be forcing all of this, and to instead be able to like really take your time, get a whole bunch of get 6 graduates, get another 6, see them come through, build them up. It might be an interesting idea for a future series, to be honest, to not maybe buy any players, or have some only be able to buy 16-year-olds or under 21-year-olds or something. But it will kind of be super interesting. I don't know what the restrictions will be, but effectively the main philosophy being to primarily base your team around graduates and build it up that way. But obviously that's going to be a much longer time horizon to get to the Masters League. I mean, obviously you get a graduate, by the time they don't really have any real chance of being a good Masters League player until they're in their early 20s. So straight away you're talking that's 8 months. 8 months for the first pool of graduates, of which only maybe one of them or two of them could make that level. So it's, that would be a much, much longer series in nature, over more than a year, probably. So to sort of do that, but it would be much more interesting, I think, from the squad building, and a bit more dynamic, and yeah, it would be kind of cool. It would be fun. But anyway, moving on. Too low passing, too low tackling, too low tackling for age and whatever, just not where he needs to be. He's got some stuff to work with, to be honest. It is an example of a player that if he was in our starting squad, he probably would be around for a long time as the backup, and then the second backup and the third backup. We would just keep him for ages, because on minimum wages and this age and this and that, but he's probably a bit too good for what you could expect for a starting squad, I'd say, on the whole. But if he was, this is a totally cool player to have around, but at these wages it's all different. He needs to be good enough to start, basically, and he wouldn't be for our team. Not a million miles off though, mind you. Just not quite. He's pretty good, to be honest, at the level, he's pretty good. There's stuff to work with here. He's just not quite there. Probably the closest out of all the players we've looked at, though, to be honest. Even closer than that central defender. That's probably the next closest. This guy's pretty close. It's just not quite. That's the thing, not quite. It's just well-rounded, not quite. A lot of this stuff, again, there's not a lot of stuff here over 60 where the attributes start at. But, yeah, anyway. I think my statement is fair. If he was in the starting squad, he'd be around for a long time, but we're not going to buy him. This guy, just too old, borderline too old, and not good enough to justify getting him. Again, borderline too old, and again, just not good enough to justify getting him. Too old, too expensive, too everything, but, he's got some serious strengths here. I don't know. Anyway, it's not even worth discussing, just too expensive for us. This guy, just behind where he needs to be. Just, again, the passing and the tackling, just not even above graduate level attributes. This guy, again, sorry, didn't move on. Same thing, though. Just not above graduate level, and he's 27, so... this guy, just 12 speed. And not good enough to compensate for that. This guy... there's a lot here. Could be a big discussion if he wasn't 33 with 800k wages, but he is, so moving on. There's a lot here. He's definitely a player we could consider. He doesn't have everything we'd want, but he's a bit slow ideally and whatever, but if he was much, much younger, this would be a huge discussion about whether we go for this guy or not, but he's not. This guy, the finishing low for 19. We're dismissing graduates that are strikers because they have less than this at 15. So, out of all of the technicals and mentals, it's just positioning, which really doesn't matter for a striker. That's even above graduate level. And out of all the physicals, it's just the speed, and not by it's okay 71 or whatever, but it's just there's not enough there at all. Similar type of situation. It's just not that much bigger, higher than the starting level. Key stuff just isn't high enough, basically, to consider. This guy, again, like, they're just not good. They're not good enough, basically. They could be good enough to play in our youth team, mind you, against our current players, but just not good enough to pay money for, to buy. Just not good enough. We got two strikers, I think, in our academy, in our hold slots at the moment, that are both just materially better than this guy, even if all their remaining attributes turn out really low. All their remaining unrevealed attributes turn out really low. This guy, probably the best out of them, but again, it's just like, if he was 16, quite a conversation to be had. Maybe we buy him, but he's not. He's 18. So this guy, again, just behind where he needs to be at this age for us to consider. This guy, just not good enough. This guy, just quite well rounded. If he was in our starting squad, he could be around for a long time, but similar thing. Like, we'd be totally happy to have this kind of guy as a backup long term if we didn't have to buy him and we didn't have to pay those wages, but we would. So yeah, no players there. And then the training options, we already selected them in the previous video because we already, like I said, did it. But the ones that, it was only 2. So it was this one. It was right, it was a bit of an interesting one. So it was 1 natural fitness versus 4 long shots. Now, under normal circumstances for a centre half, we probably would take the 1 natural fitness, but we ended up picking the 4 long shots because this guy has really high long shots. And even though he's not typically taking him in matches because he's a centre half, it's possible that a set piece unfolds that he ends up taking 1, but it's not that much of a thing, to be honest. Like, yeah, maybe it's possible, but it's whatever. So he's not naturally really ever going to take many at all in matches. It's going to be quite a rare thing. However, it is possible with the +4, he'll go to 64 and he's only 19, and if he gets another couple +4s or whatever, he could easily end up being well into the 70s, basically, is the way this is going. Possibly even into the 80s with the long shots. He could end up being our set piece taker for long range shots, and so you definitely always want at least one player on the pitch that's very good at long shots so they can take those set pieces, and he could end up being that. Long shots is something initially for our player recruitment we were prioritising quite high, so we do sort of have a few players with decent long shots sprinkled throughout, but it's something that, as our tactic changes, as we picked up faster players in particular versus the slower ones, when our tactic generally had slower players, we were having more long shots because their players were taking longer to get up and less chance of the other team was having more time to get back, and so on and so forth. So there are reasons, but now as we've picked up faster players, we end up with less of these players taking long shots, and more of the time they're ending up in the box. So we have had an evolution of, like, for our central midfielders, for example, we were highly prioritising long shots, but actually, especially when they're box to box, they're ending up in the box, as the name says, and the long shots is not as important as... So this guy is a classic example of this. We recruited him for his long shots, but actually the finishing and the composure is probably way more important, which is such a shame because it's low. So I don't know the long-term future of this guy, but we'll worry about that for another video. So anyway, where I'm going with this is that we've totally deprioritized long shots in our player recruitment. So it is totally possible that over time he could have the highest long shots in the squad. He's getting +4. He might, if it ends up, like I said, well into the 70s or towards 80. To be honest, if it was 80, it would already be the highest now. So anyway, that's why. It's only because of that. He may be the set piece taker in the future, and it's being traded off against 1 natural fitness. Now, if that was being traded off, so let's say against an extra point, 1 point is something that really mattered, like even if it was 1 marking, we'd probably just take the 1 marking, for example. So 1 extra marking, more than what it is. And then the other one is this guy who has played quite a bit, but it's just because he's a starting squad player. He's not a player that we are happy to have long term. Unlike some of these other ones we're discussing, it is one that we definitely want to move away from. So now we're just picking, but he does play. So we're just picking the one that he does play sometimes. So we're just picking the one that we think makes him the most useful player for us as a short term thing. And it was this, because it's a 2 tackling. It was a little bit close, to be honest, but this one went with it just for various reasons. He's already super slow. Whenever he plays, we do have to really put him in a spot where try to make the speed not matter that much, and in all likelihood, that's going to be this trying to get him to step up out of the way to make tackles, so that the other guys can stay back and protect the long balls or whatever. So considering that, the tackling, it's worth putting the tackling up a bit to lose the speed because whenever he plays, you're probably prioritising the tackling, trying to get him to make tackles as opposed to do other stuff. Probably. I think in particular this guy was high in marking, so it's a bit of a tricky situation because you want to mark. But anyway, it was close. We went with it. Maybe we're wrong, to be honest, but that was our original reasoning. I didn't think at the time about the marking. Thought of it now, but we'll stick with it. I honestly think it's very close, and it's not. You can just convince yourself in swings and roundabouts, and I think to some degree here it's like he's only playing in the case of a lot of injuries, and to some degree he just ends up doing. We just got to put together whatever we can. So in the end, his attributes will be whatever they are, and we'll just work around that. But I'm just saying we went with this one. But if you had this player in this situation and you decided to go with the other one, I don't think I would be able to convince you that you made the wrong decision. Let's put it that way. So, all right, awesome. And we got the trialist still. It's quite interesting because when we did the original run through on this, it's it was around this time as well. So anyway, right. Vision. We already found that out before. The crossing for this guy, we already found that out was low. This guy, maybe we didn't. No, we found that because I've already done it. Now I'm getting confused. I think we found the crossing out this one. So we got the reveal on the crossing. I think this now means that he's no good really for a striker role that drifts wide to pick up balls in the channels because he can't cross them in. So that leaves him to only be a striker with a more central type role, and he's got low aerial ability. So that's an issue. Now, the only other real central role that he can have at this point really is just poacher, pretty much. So the finishing is probably behind where it needs to be. The thing with the low passing, so all the super creative stuff is out the window. The drifting into channels is out the window. The target man is out the window. The complete striker is basically out the window. Everything is out the window except for poacher, basically, for this guy. So, and the finishing is kind of behind where it needs to be. Ideally would be, but potentially you can make that up if all of the other stuff that matters is super high. So all of the other stuff that matters for this role now is control, movement, and obviously some other stuff that's revealed, but the stuff that's not revealed. So basically, unless this guy's control and movement both come out super high, we won't end up taking him. Now the control is next, so that's why we're thinking, well, the crossing came out bad. It eliminates him from basically one of the two possible types of things he could do for this team, and but there's still one left. So if the control comes out super high, we may end up waiting for the movement, but it is last. We've got to bear that in mind. We won't find that out possibly until right at the end of the month. So it is definitely just a player. If there is a very good other option comes up, we can just swap him out. But for now, or if the controller's low, we will just swap him out. So this guy, 57 aerial ability. The parrying comes out at 30. At this point, we're waiting for the shot stopping for this guy because it's coming up soon. We're kind of conceptually happy with a keeper like this. If the shot stopping is super high, if it's low, we abandon him, and if it's somewhere between high and low, we'll make a decision. But we're skipping over this one to go to the other keeper because we only really want one keeper to graduate. So at this point, this guy is kind of looking like he's got quite a few attributes left, but as long as they don't all come out low, they're just generally coming out decent or high, whatever. Like this guy's pretty well rounded. At the end of the day, the attributes do matter though. But my gut feel is like we're probably happy to end up with this guy. Could be wrong though. Obviously, it matters what they come out as, but could be happy. So this guy is effectively like, I feel like, if this shot stopping particularly comes out high, then one of these two we're happy with. I think it's just how long we've got to keep both in slots for to make the decision. It could be very fast if the shot stopping comes out low. We prioritise to some degree getting a keeper because we know for 100% certainty that we need one. Because we'll only have one in the squad next season in the EU squad, and he's abysmal. So we need at least two. So we need to be getting one. If we don't get one, ideally we'll be buying one, sort of thing. So that's why it's an absolute need. Right, and then this striker, He's got the aerial ability. He can't dribble, so he's not going to be drifting into the channels or whatever. This guy's going to be more of a target man type role, probably. Maybe a complete striker. Not a poacher because he's got super low control. So he's either target man, is moreish. I think is how we're thinking of this guy. On the whole, he's probably just not going to be good enough. That's my gut feel, probably. But if the finishing comes out at like 60, maybe, the thing is the next two attributes revealed are movement, which matters, quite a bit for a striker, and then the finishing. So it's the reason why he's in is just because if these both come out at like 60, all of a sudden this guy is looking a lot better. So yeah, if the movement, so yeah, that's why he's in. We could pass him up though at any point beforehand, even if there's some other sort of better option to speculate on. Right, moving through the actual players here. This guy's got 40. He's only got 1, 2, 3, 4. He's only got 5 attributes left to reveal, and he's got 40 average attribute reveals value. It's like super high, super well rounded. Could totally add this guy in. But I think in particular, it's just the case that the passing is low-ish. It's okay or whatever, but for a central midfielder, for what we need, our style of football, we're trying to do a slower build-up, possession-oriented, passing the ball around the lot. We can try and cut corners on that to some degree and say, well, okay, this striker's great and does all these other things, striker-ish things, awesome at scoring goals, and his passing's not great and we'll compromise on it. And we can do that for a central defender, like, oh, he's good at tackling and marking and blah, blah, blah. But we can't really do that for a central midfielder. That's the thing, like, it's got to be non-compromising, I think, that they don't necessarily have to be exceptionally high, but they can't end up being low. Like, we can't be running central midfielders trying to get into the Masters League that have like 60 passing or 65 passing for a central midfielder. So I think on that basis we will not get him. And another reason, by the way, is just because he's super well-rounded, so there's the true value in this guy, so to speak, longer term. The thing is, super well-rounded central midfielders, this guy would just be kind of like awesome if you were just playing like that, like a 4-3-3 type thing where you're just bombing it forwards to your wingers and your striker or whatever. Like, he doesn't need to pass. He doesn't necessarily even need to tackle because it's a very up and back type thing. Like, your attackers are doing, lose the ball, go back to their attackers, going back and forth. For that type of football, he's kind of awesome because he should end up decent in the air, should end up decent at moving around, gets the odd long shot, gets the odd, he just basically tasks with just clogging up the midfield and doing the odd jobs or whatever. And if he ends up super well-rounded, he could be awesome at that. But so there's a separate side issue with this guy that the determination is low. For a player that basically what you really want is just to generally get all of the attributes up. So it's just going to hinder that process a little bit. Right, this guy, low tackling. This guy, don't use right winger, but fast. And interestingly, we talked about this before, but it's like crossing, flair, finishing, dribbling. Super interesting. This remaining attributes are like basically all the key one, a whole bunch of key ones, almost in order of how key they are, almost. And all of a sudden, if it's like 55. Just say they all come out at 55, like this guy all of a sudden looks awesome. But, or we could just end up looking totally bad, like abysmal. It's an interesting one, but we don't use right winger, we don't use AMR, so we're just not going to speculate on that. This guy, just key stuff is just miles away, and he's not that good for what you see. This guy, just 40 tackling and not enough other stuff that we can see at the moment that makes up for that at all. If anything, other like 12 marking, for example, he's just way behind. It just kind of doesn't matter what these other attributes are. He's just not going to be good enough. This guy, don't use right back, don't know the tackling, don't know the other key stuff, speed, whatever. And then marking not particularly great and whatever. It's just not 6 determination, not good enough basically. This guy, 31 tackling. This guy, 5 long shots. Slow, just not good enough basically. This guy, don't use DMR, 1 speed. Wow, 1, okay. This guy, passing and tackling miles off in their key to know to have any chance to get that guy. This guy, don't use left wing back, 3 speed. This guy, don't tackling miles off and not other stuff here that makes you think worth speculating and waiting for that, i.e. 45 marking, don't have the aerial ability, 41 speed. composure really low, which can matter for a centre half. Potentially, if he had super high passing in vision, then I don't know, probably not anyway, but maybe. But again, you don't know the passing, so just not enough there to care to speculate on. This guy, don't use right wing back. This guy, just not good enough. I think the 3 dribbling combined with 34 finishing or whatever, like he's just eliminated from too many roles. Not a good target man. I think, if you can look at a player and say if every single unrevealed attribute turns out to be 60 and he's still just not going to be good enough, then there's a reason to not have him. Obviously, 24 shot stopping, and this guy just, too low finishing, 6 speed, whatever, not good enough. So on the whole, like, not really any of them. I think if we were running wingers, that this guy you could speculate on this guy, bring him in. I could totally convince myself to bring him in instead of probably the striker. Was it the striker? I think... Well, anyway, there'd be, instead of one of those 2 strikers, I could totally convince myself to do that, but we don't use right winger. Was it this guy? No, it was this guy. And then the other one is just this guy. I think you could, if we were playing a more direct style of football, this guy would be good and we would have him in, but we're not. We're really trying to build up a passing the ball around, bringing a lot of players into the attack, retaining possession type of thing, and he just doesn't fit that, basically. So we're not bringing in any of these, and we will keep rolling with these guys. But there are some key things coming up soon for some of these players. So in the coming days, I expect that for sure at least one of these, probably 2 of these, to just immediately get eliminated when the control come out low, immediately eliminated. Shot stopping come out low, immediately eliminated. Movement comes out low. Depending on how low, we may wait for the finishing. But if that also doesn't come out, like, basically extremely high, this guy's just eliminated. And even if this shot stopping comes out at not low, but just reasonable, whatever, at some point in the not too distant future, we will be eliminating one of the 2 keepers. At some point, we're just going to commit to one before the end of the month. So at the end of the day, I would be gobsmacked if these 6 guys end up being the 6 graduates. So to be clear, for argument's sakes, if we found out this shot stopping today and it came out at 20, then what we would do is we would put this MC in that slot. That's what we would do. So, and then this guy could easily have ended up graduating at the end of the month. So it's a bit of a weird situation, really, that this guy is kind of like a safe bet, but we're still in the mode of trying to get the exact type of players we need, rather than trying to speculate on getting something that may be great instead of happy to settle for something that is just good. I think might be a summary there. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'll catch you for the next one.